First of all, let's talk about the timing of these warrants, because people have sort of raised eyebrows and wondered whether the warrants are being issued just ahead of this conference, but also ahead of this important meeting between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. What's the reason behind the timing of these warrants being released?
Many conspiracy theorists. We follow the evidence. It wasn't in our gift to decide when the decision was rendered. And my job was to follow the evidence. For the last 1 year, the team has been working very hard. We've been analysing it. And we presented it to independent judges of the ICC. They decided, not me, to issue a decision on Friday. It's simply the timing that worked out, and it's only right that when bullets are flying and bombs are landing and destruction and mayhem is the staple diet of too many of the most vulnerable people, the law needs to be on the front lines, and we're not going to wait or be pedestrian when the law has to be seen in action.
Now, you focus in these warrants on the issue of children, specifically being deported from Ukraine and into Russia. We have, on Sky News, seen that firsthand. Orphanages in Kherson emptied by armed Russian soldiers. But the Russians say what they're doing is not deporting children, but saving them from shellfire, from a war zone. Is that any defence for them?
Well, the point is this, that we have to follow the evidence, and my job when I submitted the warrants under the statute was to investigate incriminating and exonerating evidence equally. And it's clear under the 4th Geneva Convention that children must be protected, they have to be looked after and made a priority. And firstly, they have to be in danger when you move them. Secondly, if you move them to other parts of Ukraine which are safe. Presidents and prime ministers have been in Kyiv, in Lviv, and all the rest of it. And even if, for whatever reason, that's not immediately possible, go to a neutral third country. But what seems to have happened is something quite different. The first port of call has been trying to make Ukrainian children Russian, giving them passports, teaching them not Ukrainian, that is their language, but teaching them Russian. And that's not allowed. So to the extent there's any truth in the argument that's being put forward, and we will keep our case under continuous review, is I would call upon the Russian Federation not only to repatriate and reunite children with their mother country, contact the United Nations. Russian Federation can contact the ICRC, contact a third country and say, well, we have no ulterior motive. We just want the welfare of the children to be first, and they can go back to Ukraine and safe places. But that ball really is in the court of the decision makers in the Russian Federation. The ball that was in ours is to independently and impartially investigate. That's what we did. And then the independent judges of the International Criminal Court reviewed that, and they said, yes, there is a case to answer, and that's why we are where we are today.
So there's a challenge for Russian authorities. I think what's caused some surprise as well is that you've gone to the very top, Vladimir Putin. What is the evidence against him? And you've also been asked in a number of interviews, what is the point in bringing these charges against somebody who it's unlikely he's not going to be hauled to The Hague? And I think you've said that various characters who didn't think that would happen to them, it has happened to them. In your heart of hearts, Mr. Khan, do you expect to see Vladimir Putin on trial in The Hague?
What I expect is for myself to do my best to do my job, for the men and women of my office to discharge their responsibilities independently and with full impartiality. And that means fearlessly, with courage, with independence, with full objectivity, to relentlessly pursue the evidence to separate fiction from fact. This is what we've done. Now, you're quite right. Those doomsters and gloomsters, to use a phrase that's perhaps overused, thought that it was a fool's errand to set up a Yugoslav tribunal, but we saw President Milosevic, Karadzic and Mladic come before the court. We saw the same with the former Prime Minister of Rwanda for the '94 genocide, Jean Kabanda, Hissan Habre in the African court, Charles Taylor. The list does go on. So those that think they have a free pass or that there's no consequences need to realize the law is out there. It's not perfect. It has a scattered record since the Holocaust, because we've all heard, your viewers have heard, the promise of never again, and we have heard time and time again, to the point of some people getting anaesthetized. But this is why the children that I saw in the homes when I was on the battlefield a couple of weeks ago in the south of Ukraine, they're not numbers. The cots were inhabited by babies, by young children, that have hopes and dreams, and they're not being brought up now, many of them, under their own language, in their own schools, but under a Russian curriculum, to be given Russian passports, adopted to strangers who are Russian. That's not right, and that could be remedied if there was a will. And that's what the law requires.
One last question. We've heard some surprising rhetoric from Dmitry Medvedev, the former Prime Minister, saying that he's so outraged by what he's hearing from the likes of you and other officials at the ICC that you should look to the skies and watch out for missiles that could be sent towards The Hague. What do you think of that kind of talk?
Well, I think if we raise our gaze, we look for God and pray, but we don't are worried about those things. Look, these are... I think everybody in a position of responsibility should be mature to realise that the world is in a precarious situation. It's a time for leaders and mature judgment, and I think everybody should act under the law and maturely. And that's the only advice one will give anybody. You give it to any friend, you'd give it to any foe. The truth is the truth.